In Hollywood, the nuclear button would be a briefcase with a red button. But in Zenless Zone Zero, it's the briefcase that could turn into a Psy. But no matter how much damage the Psy could nuke, it could never compete with Jane Doe and Bernie's Psy. Cause nuke could only end a country, but those Psy could end a humanity.
命令を待つわ。トントントントントントントントントントントントントントントントントン。
Hugo, he's the only true nuker in the entire game. All he does is really to just wait for an enemy to be stunned, then he attacks with a single ultimate or a single skill to get majority of the damage, and it's literally one hit. But the other agent that claim to be nuker like Jane Doe and Evelyn, they do deals a lot of damage in a short time span, but they ain't really a nuker. But they were the closest thing to the nuke. I've been test playing Hugo in the story mode here and there and figure a lot of things out. I don't think he's as easy as what people expect it to be. There's some nuance to that, but I'm gonna get into that later. And today we're gonna get into how to actually nuke with Hugo, along with advanced way to nuke and the tactical way to nuke. So basically Hugo is a nice DPS whose main DPS is coming from attack that convert the stun window time into damage. And after the massive amounts of damage, the enemy would get right out of the stun window and receive 25% of days. In percentage, this 25% days is exceptionally great against the really strong enemy like the one in Deadly Assault. And the longer the time the stun window an enemy has, the more damage the Hugo is going to dealt. The special attacks that Hugo dealt to consume all the stun window is called Totalize. There's a whole wall of text here, but it's basically telling you that you want to use the skill or ultimate as soon as the enemy is stunned, or you're gonna lose a tons of damage. Not only you lose a lot of damage, you could also lose the amounts of days when enemy recover from the Totalize. Like this one I got no days and low damage. This one I got 15 days, and this one is 25 days with a tons of damage. But you can't just use skill or ultimate right away when enemy got stunned. You're gonna buff yourself with this thing, Dark Abyss Reverb. It gives you 12% crit rate and 30% crit damage, and that leads to the most basic way to nuke the enemy. So you wanna stun the enemy with the swing jazz, then you chain attack into Hugo in order to get the buff, and you use the skill or ultimate to get the Totalize immediately. I think the amounts of damage is totally fine, but there's a way that you could increase 15% of damage other than this combo. But first we're gonna talk about the stun window. A lot of people thought that stun window happens when it turns into gray. But it's not. Stunning actually starts at the moment it starts flashing. And that is exactly the moment when the time is start ticking. It means that your Hugo is losing the damage from that point. And chain attack with Hugo would result in wasting a lot of time in the animation during the stun window, and that lead to 15% loss of damage. But Hugo gotta take the buff, right? But luckily there's other way for Hugo to take the buff from himself other than chain attack, is that you wanna have Hugo to stun the enemy himself. So what you wanna do is accumulate the days with your stunner up to like 95, 98 days. Then you use skill on the enemy so that when it hit the enemy, it got stunned, and the Totalize trigger on the last hit of the skill. So when Totalize hit the enemy is already stunned, and you could get the most damage out of it. And even if you mess up, you could just use skill again to land the Totalize into the enemy. Yeah, I was pressing pause because it failed. I actually pausing here out of being ashamed of my own mistake, but it's actually a really good demonstration on how to recover when you fail. And be aware that when you are using this with ultimate, it's gonna be significantly harder because ultimate would give less amounts of days. And yeah, even after you totalize the enemy, you could follow up with another skill if you have excessive energy, so that you could also recover your ultimate and dealing some extra days to the enemy, because his skill actually have 20% buff on the days. And finally, the tactical nuke. This is probably the best way to get the most damage out of it. You wanna have your support equipped with Protopunks and Astral Voice, and after you get all the buff from Astral Voice, which is 24% attacks, you want to parry your enemy first, then use skill to stun the enemy and totalize the enemy in one go. The buff from the Protopunks and the Astral Voice are actually very forgiving, and they all got 15 seconds, while Hugo attacks only need like 3 to 5 seconds. So I think it's completely practical to do it, but you gotta set up a little bit, and in this way, you would waste as little stun window as humanly possible and get the most damage out of it. So when you totalize, should you prioritize skill or the ultimate, you will see that ultimate would get less totalized number because it took more animation to cast. And more animation means the less totalized damage you're gonna get. But the skill damage and the ultimate damage are calculated separately to the totalize. Even though you would lose a little bit of time in the ultimate, you would still get up to 17% more damage in ultimate than the skill. So definitely prioritize the ultimate first. I think Hugo's ChainAtk is actually pretty good with the trash mob. Not only he could group the mobs together, if you follow up with the skill, you would also recover some portion of your energy back and makes your rotation smoother. So definitely don't sleep on his chain attacks when you are dealing with trash mob. Hormone Punks is expected to be his best 4 set. It's almost like this set is trailer made for him cause it fit his natural rotation, and probably anything with crit rate, crit damage, and you better wanna have his crit rate at about at least 90%, because if you miss that crit on the totalize, you're gonna be crying really hard. His best in slot team is probably gonna be Lighter and Trigger, because Trigger is the only stunner that behave like a support. She's basically Astra with stun capability, and the reason that Astra isn't here is because of the Hugo's passive. Having one stunner in the team would increase 300 of his attack, and when having 2 stunner in the team, he would get 900 attacks, so you are getting 600 bonus attack from Trigger as a class, and Astra couldn't benefit from this passive. So I'll just listed his best teammate here. You could mix and match with any agent here, as long as you have one stunner available. It would probably works the way I sorted. The best one is definitely going to be Lighter, who has crazy amounts of buff for the ice and fire teammates, and Trigger being Trigger. The extra 35 multiplier is huge, and her additional attacks would also make the other on-field stunners stun faster without contesting on-field time. Qingyi would provide 600 attacks to the Hugo because of her class, along with 80% breaks multiplier, so she's better than Astra when you are pairing with Hugo, and Astra is being just Astra. Even without the most synergy kit with the Hugo, she's still on the top up here. Lycan is mid, along with Caesar, because Caesar doesn't give 600 attacks, because Caesar doesn't benefit from the Hugo's passive, and I also expect Nicole to be here. I could be wrong on this one, but I think Coleda might not be better than Caesar and Nicole, even though she gives a really quick daze, but she provide nothing on top of that. And Anby is gonna be here because she would benefit 600 attacks from Hugo, and I use Lucy here as a benchmark because Lucy also gives 600 attacks, but she doesn't provide any stun, so Anby is the only viable worst option. So yeah, I do think Hugo is a breath of fresh air. I mean, if you don't have Miyabi or Aveline, his pool value would be higher, and as long as you have agent like Trigger or Qingyi, and of course the best option is the Lighter, you would be slapping with this team. But remember that he's directly contesting Lighter with Alanjo and Aveline, and that would lead you to use Aveline and Alanjo less. That is something that you want to keep in mind before you decide to pull for him. And he's expected to be about at 0.5 tier, not like the most broken unit in the entire game, but definitely one of the best in his own niche. All of his Mindscape are straight up attack buff, but his Mindscape 4 and Mindscape 6, you need to incorporate for like charge basic into his rotation to get the buff from Mindscape 4 and 6. And Mindscape 6 is simply turning him into an on-field DPS because he could totalize the enemy without stunning the enemy, even though the damage is not gonna be as high. And by the way, his whole attack is shooting something out, and when it hit the enemy, it's gonna give you quick assist. And I think that would make it easier to get the buff from the Astral Voice, but that's really it. But it's not gonna benefit him, but his stunner. So I don't really see the use of his whole attacks. Anyway, I hope you like this rough breakdown, and see ya guys.